Okay.
Go ahead.
It's not your ches in the Bamidbar, because the numbers start over. In the Vayikra of Midbar, the numbers start over in the Torah 4 times. So the Shkocha brought this. Begansby asked me to give a share just a short while ago, and says whatever you want. Give a share. So stop for a second. It's just I didn't prepare anything special, but this week's Likutei Torah, besides this being always some Yom Mashiach, is talking about the Indian of Livyasan and Sharabar, and the idea of Los Love. So I thought to learn this Maimer. It's actually somewhat of a famous Maimer. It's a Kurza Maimer. It's mentioned over here in Likutei Torah. It's also in Sefer Shnei Ma'oris. From Eisel, there's a Hanach from the Rebbe over there. There's a beer from Tzemach Tzedek. It's somewhat discussed quite a bit in different places, and there's also the same Maimer in the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim on Maimor Razal, where he elaborates a little bit more, even than over here. So I'll insert some of those ideas. So it's based on the pasuk Livyasan Zeh Yatzarta, that Abishai created this Livyasan, this big fish of sorts, right, to play with. Irches in Bamidbar. In Vayikra. Sorry. The first. The Shmois is the first, and then you have the 4 sets of numbers.
34.
So how does this come into Parashat Shemini, right? So it comes to Parashat Shemini because Parashat Shemini, the second portion of Parashat Shemini, it starts off with the Zeh Chaya, right? That Moshe Rabbeinu shows them everything what you could eat and what you cannot eat. So Medrash Rabbah in Parashat Shemini, Parashat Gimel, Behemis Livyasan Klinish Stigmas Lavai. So Zeh Chaya, he's talking about not just about now, he's talking about the future as well. And he says that with regards to the behemoths and the fish, this is essentially a knigin. Knigin is a bullfight of sorts, some type of adventure, some type of entertainment of tzaddikim for lost love. Right? What's going to be the exact entertainment, the exact show? That behemoths noites Livyasan bikranov. That the animals will they'll pierce Livyasan with their horns, the koiroi, and it will bust it, it will tear it. Livyasan neitzl behemoths v'serinov, and Livyasan will cut the behemoths with its fins, v'noichroi, and it will kill it. That's the Medrash Rabbah says over there in Parashat Shemini.
And neither one lives.
Neither one lives, correct. Frek the Medrash v'lekach taninon, right? He's skipping. Alter was not going through the whole Medrash, but he says. Do we not learn like this in the Mishnah? Hakol sheichtem, ilam sheichtem, chutz magkotzer, chuli. The Mishnah in the beginning of Chulin says that everybody has a right to shecht, and every sharp device could be used as the shechting device, and you could do it at any time. But the things that are excluded is magkotzer, right? This is a harvesting sickle, right? And chuli. And other types of rough edges, a bunch of different things that are serrated of sorts, yeah? So how does this square with the halacha? So he quotes the pasuk in Yeshaya. It says, Torah me'iti teitze. And the Medrash says, Torah me'iti teitze. The Torah emanates from me. And Chidush Torah me'iti teitze, the Medrash learns pshat in that pasuk. That doesn't just mean that Torah will emanate, but there will be a novelty in Torah. There will be a new Torah, which means that Los Love, there'll be new dimensions of Torah that weren't present when the Torah was given.
So this Shchita will be kosher.
This Shchita will be kosher. Actually, the actual Lashon of the Medrash that we have it printed, it says Terech Lashon Miti Teitze. That's mean people think that the Lashon of the pasuk in Yeshaya is Terech Lashon Miti Teitze. There will be a new Torah. It doesn't say that in the Lashon Yeshaya. The Medrash is learning pshat in Yeshaya that Chidush Torah meditates. So it's different gesois. So what is pshat?
Torah, but you're learning a new halachos from the
There's
same
new
Torah.
dimensions of Torah. There's new ideas that weren't present. The Mishnah is correct that you can't use the Magul Kotzer, but there's going to be a Chidush Torah when Mashiach comes. There's going to be the halacha that was always intended to be part of the Torah when the Eibusher gave it in Har Sinai. It was always intended to be that Mashiach comes to be able to shut
So
the
you're
Torah.
learning it out from the original Torah.
Correct.
What does the
But
Mishnah
it's still a
mean?
new dimension.
A new
What does the
dimension.
Mishnah?
Mishnah's for now. Now Torah's going to explain at the end of the Maimon exactly what it means.
Torah can't be, it's forever, it can't change.
Torah's forever. But the Alter will then shut. At least the Pim see how it works. So he explains, Shakash Baruch Hu yatir az shchita zu. The Eibusher will permit this type of shechting. She yishchit Livyasan as a behemoth sarpinov. The Livyasan will slaughter the behemoth with his fins. Who are these behemoths that are having this adventure, having this fight with this fish? This is what's brought in other places. And less love you can have the Livyasan. Over here just mentions behemoths, but in more detail, more specificity, he's talking specifically about the Shar Habar. Okay. So to understand what is this whole adventure about, that is going to be this showdown between the Livyasan and Shar Habar, they can kill each other, and that's going to be the big event. Mashiach's coming. So Alter Rebbe explains this in a deeper way. The Livyasan and Shar Habar represent two types of righteous individuals. Ha'alef oisan shehem b'seiser shavidasim beruchnius pirish b'kavanas halev liyach liyichudum yenim b'chines haliyas. The first type is a type of tzaddik that's always in a hidden state, which means there's no overt avodah. You don't see their avodah. You don't see what they're accomplishing. They're working in a way that's always in the spiritual realms. It's in their heart. And the actual avodah that they're doing, what they're doing in actuality is miyachid yichudim, which you don't know what's going on in their heart and how they're miyachid their mind and their heart. So that's something that's not necessarily recognizable outwardly. So that's also b'chinas haliyas. It's also elevation. They're going higher and higher and higher, but it's not something that's connected necessarily to their gashmistic activities. He brings an example. For example, Shimon Bar Yochai, that he found himself not by his own choice, but this is because of the circumstances of the Gzeiros. So he found himself in a cave for 13 years. That it was zicher, it was certain that he was precluded from doing certain active commandments. How do you know? The Gemara says the only thing he sustained himself on was from boxer, from carib, and from a spring of water. The ivrilahu, that was miraculous, which means everything that wasn't miraculous, he wasn't able to do. Therefore, he certainly did not eat matzah on Pesach. The kiddush al yain, he didn't do the Konas Chazal of making kiddush on yain. There is actually an opinion that it's deraisa, but most people hold that it's Konas Chazal. Kiddush is deraisa. The kiddush al yain is the Rabbanan. The esrog, sukkah, all these other things, obviously he did not do. The question is, the Rebbe asks this question in the Sichos, is same way they should have made a chruv in the Maya, they should have given matzah and they should have given a sukkah and everything else as well. And this is connected to the discussion with regards to Chanukah and the Nes and the Beis Hamikdash. Is the mitzvahs can't be in the way of a Nes. Not that it can't be in the way of a Nes, but it's not the Eibusher's kavanah. The Eibusher wants that if you do mitzvahs ma'aseh, it should be ma'aseh. It should be an active ma'aseh. You should have physical dough that you bake into matzah. You should have a physical sukkah that you're building yourself. Lastly, you should make a sukkah, not just come this idea. But there is an approach of doing mitzvahs beruchnius. That's a separate thing. But if you're doing the mitzvahs b'ma'aseh, it has to be ma'aseh gashmi.
That's the answer that Rebbe gives?
That's what the Rebbe discusses.
But he was learning Torah Shema, he was there, and it didn't matter if you learn just Torah, you don't have to be mechuyev in any other mitzvah.
That's another discussion. Actually, it connects to this idea of the machlekes between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in general. That Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai b'chlal felt that divesting yourself from the hazah was an approach, and he said that you don't have to be chodesh and zrei, you don't have to work b'chlal. And Rabbi Shmuel said that this is not the approach, and most people who tried Rabbi Shimon's approach says they also be able, they weren't successful, which shows that this approach most definitely was not for the majority of people. It was only for a minority of people that were able to act that way and be successful. So that's what I wanted to get to. So it always bothered me this the Chen Harizal. Where does it say that Harizal didn't do mitzvahs? But it's more than that. Where does it say he didn't do mitzvahs?
Right.
But
Right.
these are
Which is
hakav-
Gashmis, holding the actual Esther, holding the
maybe the
holding
mitzvahs. I mean,
tefillin, the
his
tefillin.
Talmidim talk about it, the various kavanas. He did things this way, things that way. So the Alter Rebbe in the Maimer that's printed in the Memorial Zal, the Kuf Malf, and the Aurel Zakin. So it's interesting. Over there, he adds not just that Arizal. He says v'chein abal Shem Tov v'talmidov, v'chein chol davar. Every generation there's tzaddikim that are actually doing the mitzvah beruchnis, which seems to indicate, the way I understand it, I can't say, v'shtech mevinis in tzaddikim, that it seems that these Grace Rebbes, they're doing gashmitic mitzvahs, but that's not their mitzvahs. Their mitzvahs are spiritual things. So the fact that they're doing the gashmitic is because why not? There's no gzeira, they don't have to be in a Maira. So they could also shake a lulav, they could also go to the sukkah. But their avoida is in Yehuda. It's not their avoida in a gashmitic. So it seems like. Okay. V'habeis, but there's another level to it. It's an emotional, spiritual connection, not a practical gashmic connection. That's what's clear. It's because he says before Loshen that it's not nikir. It's not something that's recognizable outside. You don't know what the kavanas are, what the yichudim are. That base. So the alternative way, the second way, is him eisans dikim shehem begilui. This is a revealed tzaddik shavidasim begashmius, that their service is with physical matter. That they're actually physically fulfilling an active commandment, for example, yeah, and that is done by Shuhu Gamkin Amshachas Eretz Me'adei Hashem. That is done by doing a practical thing, and they're drawing down ruchnis. It's not that there's no ruchnis hamshachas, but the purpose is to be mamshich in velt rather than miyachid l'mayla. Spiritual avoida is miyachid yichud l'mayla. It doesn't have to do with connecting to the the avoida of other tzaddikim is to draw down the ruchnis through the act of gashmi. So the way they have mitzvahs, but uvda dafke. The way you draw down is specifically and deliberately through uvda, through action. It can't be done without action. Yeah, that in the days of Mikdash, they couldn't fulfill simcha just by being in a state of elation, by being a spiritual ecstasy. That's not sufficient. They had to actually have basar. They had to eat as basar shlamim. That's the way you draw down simcha. So that mitzvah was only fulfilled by shechting shlamim and eating it. Yeah. And now the way we fill this simcha out there, that's the Raisa, according to my opinion, that the way we do it today is by drinking wine, because we're precluded from making karpanis, and we can't do it through basar. We can't just be in a state of simcha by learning this. We actually have to drink that wine, and that's the way we do begashmis. The ikram shachs pesach de matzah b'shuas de matan Torah b'sukkos aydei sukkah v'luva minov. And the other type of tzaddikim, these more practical tzaddikim, is specifically through matzah and shuas and matan Torah and sukkos minov u'b'lo say yesh lahamshich klal. And without that physical action, the receptacle can be mamshich. It can be yachid. It can be mamshich. Mamshich means drawing down. Okay, so there's a note from the we're not going to go in the notes because it's some tzaddik and Kshmak Kazachim, but not for now. Vini be'emes on the bottom of the page. Vini be'emes he efshir lahagia, and he brings over here unreal b'loshen Yiddish, b'loshen Ashkenaz, where you can translate it. Yeah, you can't reach it, you can't chep it. Yeah, Likutei Torah Shemini. There's something limiting about Gashmis. Gashmis is the Gemara Gezach. The Eibush created the world, and his kavanah is to bring Elokos into this world. But nevertheless, the world has a specific limitation. And that limitation means that you're never going to be able to reach the real spirit. You're still going to be connected to Gashmis. It could be the kavanah, and the kavanah has a great mila over everything else. Right? The malachim are jealous of the mitzvah. But nevertheless, there's a certain limitation to it. So there's a mila, seemingly, to the avodah ruchnis in the first type of tzaddikim. Eludei avodah ruchnis tzaddikim now, v'heim nikram nuni yamo, so he says that first level tzaddikim that are working in the spiritual realms, they're also referred to as nuniyama, which means creatures of the sea, marine creatures, similar to fish that are not seen. They're covered by the water. Look at the surface, you only see the water. You see you don't see the bed. You don't see everything beneath the surface, which is a full marine life. Similarly, the Mechinas Am L'Skasia, they're coming from a higher level, from a hidden world, and they're found in every generation. So similar to what the Alter Rebbe did in the Maimer, but I didn't pick it up until I saw the Maimer. I realized the Alter Rebbe was saying is that every generation has this, because he mentions the Rizal, but the Vashem, the Talmidim, and all the generations. So it's clear that the Alter Rebbe is saying that every generation has tzaddikim that are functioning in both ways. And they're making those yichudim, they're making those connections that are necessary to connect the Elokus with higher levels of Elokus, the Elumus within itself. That's why we call the Livyasan. Livyasan represents the Luniyama, this marine creature, and these tzaddikim are also these Luniyama, and it's called Livyasan Shulosh Neschabrus. Levi Neschabrus means connection. Me'apam Yilavi Ishelai. That now, when Leah had her third child, she says, "Now my husband will be lent to me. She'll be connected to me. It will be a much deeper union." Okay. So let's skip this note over here. And this note goes until over here. It's about 15 lines from the top. It says, I can hago.
Yeah.
So very geschmack to learn the Tzemach Tzedek. The reason why it was called Likutei Torah is multiple reasons. One of the reasons was because they wanted the Tzemach Tzedek to publish his Hagos in Torah, and at that point he wasn't ready to do it. It's not Torah's Amarim. Later on, when it was many years later, he published it. They inserted it into the Amarim. So it's Likutei Torah, the Alter Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek together. But you can't really learn it together. You have to learn the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, then you can appreciate the Tzemach Tzedek. If you learn it together, you lose focus. If it would have been published today, Mistama they would have made horrors. That's what I assume. Stylistically, it's done differently. Okay. Achliyais kil mazeu gashmi. So it's the Chomer Gezach. We explain the Gashmi is ultimately limiting. You can't really connect to real Ruchnias. So the Chulos Tikim are higher. But there's still a limitation to that. Why? Because we're in a Gashmitic world. So we have to connect Elokus to Gashmis. We can't just let Elokus hover above. It has to be somehow connected to the world that we're in. It's necessary to also have tzaddikim that are of the second type. Their service is the Gashmitic world, and they have to fulfill physical commandments. That there's a certain pillar. That pillar is called a tzaddik, and the whole world is sustained on his behalf, which means he's bringing the connection between Elokus and Welt. It's not just enough to be mamshech what the Eibusher wants, but it's mamshech Elokus and Welt. The chomash yesh b'yabasha yesh b'yom. Right? So you have both of these worlds, and they're actually equal in many ways. That's the idea. Because they're really both necessary. So there's no real resolution over here, at least at this point, which one is superior. Another place it says it does bring which one is superior, which one is more important. But over here, the Alter Rebbe is explaining that both of them are necessary, and that's they cancel each other out in a sense. They're equal. Kihine is behold. Because there's a great advantage to the first type of tzaddikim, because their ability to elevate, to travel, to go, is very wondrous. It's very amazing. It's very lofty. And he brings example. They called Nuniyama. It's not just because they're covered, but it's also another aspect to marine life, is they're able to move very fast. There's less friction. They use the water to propel themselves. Just like fish that they swim in the ocean, the sea. That's the way that they move. With tisa achas megila maila. So he says basically, just like fish, they're able to move very quickly with one shus, one movement. It propels them very quickly in a swift manner. Similarly, the tzaddikim that are dealing in ruchnias, they don't have that same friction. You deal with gashmias, you have to always go incrementally, a little bit at a time. But when you deal in ruchnias, they're able to jump, at much greater levels without all this friction being dragged down. So he says when tzaddikim are dealing with simcha basar, right? That was elaborate over here, but in other places he talks about it. He says, that it says perish chageichem, let's say perish shabbatchem. Perish chageichem means that there is excess. Meat is taka mitzvah, it's a carbon. but ultimately it makes a person grow up. Ultimately, there's an upfall, there's waste associated with that. It's not all ruchnius. So everything that you deal with in Gashmius has consequences. Mashiach and ruchnius, it's all elevated. It's all spiritual. Mashiach and lucham lucham, but Mashenkin, the marine ones, the ones that are compared to the fish, shukamashul dog hayam shashat mitzeu magtzeu. Yeah, these fish, they go from one edge of the world to the other edge of the world. I don't know if you talk about fish b'chlar, the idea of the Livyasan that's part in the midrashim that it's going in from one edge of the world to the other edge of the world. But the idea is the same. The idea is that the potential for fish to travel throughout the whole seas is there without much limitation.
No, there's certain fish that do that.
Yeah, they go different parts of the year, and they school here, and they breed there, and they go. Tuna, yeah. They find them on the Atlantic over the island. They find them in the Philippines.
Not the same.
Huh?
Not the same tunas.
It's not the same tunas.
No, but they travel vast
There are
distances.
fish that they travel, but I don't think Philippines to do the tuna.
Yes. That's not an expert. Okay. Not an expert on this tzaddikim either, but so he says the hilucham shekumasha daga yam shashat mitzeh v'gtzeh kach hiluch beruchim titzachas el magim ma'il ma'ilom ve'in the klal b'chinas eslavus v'sich adam v'chinas tzaddikim anal shebigashmi v'simcha v'basa v'chol yayin v'chinas ish b'eshul heves. In order for tzaddik to elevate flesh, to elevate gashmius, he has to really turn on the furnace very high. He has to really, really motivate himself, really animate himself to a point that the gashmius comes in and it gets burnt, it gets elevated. It doesn't pull him down. You need to have a greater slavus. You'll see that avoida. Masha'enkin, a person that's working in ruchnius, it can be very dispassionate. It's very contained because he's not burning anything. There's no, it doesn't have to cook it up. Yeah. Adra, Bakir Sadam, it can be very cold, very dispassionate, benachas, very calm. Yeah. Ubetisa achas, skip the 2 lines over here. Ubetisa achas magin l'mayla, being that it doesn't have to deal with heating up and the resicha, that whole heat and dealing with all the friction, so you're able to reach much further with every effort. Now, Alter Rebbe says a word which is very interesting, and Alter Rebbe mentions this in multiple places, including in Tanya. But in my opinion, I didn't study this, but all the things Alter Rebbe talks about, where he says that I cannot explain this in a written way, but I rather explain it verbally, are talking about sensitive topics. It's not deep concepts, sensitive concepts. Things that he talks about tzaddikim, things that he's talking about the avoida of tzaddik, things that it's like something that he didn't want to write. He didn't want to make it black and white. He wanted to verstehen if you shaykh doesn't send this concept. I think there was something like that. Negeres Kirch talks about this also. We're talking about tzaddikim as well over there.
So in what way was it sensitive? The information?
Talking about tzaddikim, they don't do mitzvahs. What does it mean? What type of...
you don't want to give you the wrong impression.
Wrong impression. So after he couldn't write, he was a prolific writer. He wrote Svarim, Shechnorach, he wrote so many different things. But certain things he didn't want to put the writing. There's a word from the Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Tefillin, he says that I can't write the Kesher Tefillin. It's not something you could make a diagram. Every guy makes a sefer makes a diagram of Kesher Tefillin. The Rambam himself made diagrams of the Menorah and all these different things in Pirush Mishnayos. You couldn't make a diagram of a Kesher Tefillin. So hard to make a picture, right? You show step 1, 2, 3. The Gemara, I don't know Pshat, but it could be. The Gemara says that a Kesher Tefillin is something that Talmid Chacham has to know. It wasn't meant to be published. This is something you have to know. You have to, either you're in or you're not in. Either you're initiated or you're not initiated. I think it's something like that. That the thing, the business von Zazach from zwei Sorten Tzadikim. Punkt wie arbeit, exactly how the Tzadikim work. That's something I can explain to you privately. It's not meant for this forum. Ulchein lekim rashbi b'yesel marakam mitzvos ma'ases kanal elakol beruchnius l'mayla m'chnas simcha v'basa. And therefore, Rashbi found himself in that compromise situation when he was in the cave. He wasn't able to do many mitzvahs, but it was all ruchnius, and it was on a higher state. It was even higher than simcha basar. And that's the idea that the fins, yeah, he says a nikra flusfeder, right? The fins, that swims with. That's the way it swims. That his avodah was going in a very, very spiritual manner, in a very high way, very high in a high oifen that didn't have the same limitations. And that's why the whole world is dependent upon it. And therefore, being that the world depends upon it, it's a necessary thing. So when Mashiach comes and we're coming to completion of the world's Avodah, we're coming to perfection, so it's time for Livyasan to show its power, to show its superiority, that, we've overcome all the limitations, we've elevated the world to a point, and now it has to shech the Sharabar and elevate it as well. And it slaughters it specifically. It could have taken out a knife. Max, or the Abish could have made it smooth. No, Dafka with these fins that are not even, because the Abish wanted that the fins, the voida of the fish that made it, so to speak, be able to come so elevated. That's what should elevate the sharabar. Because the second avoida, the second type of tzaddikim, that's gashmias. Nikraim sharabar, they're referred to as these animals. The reason why it's called sharabar, so he explains. Pnei shar me'asmel. Generally speaking, gashmias comes from pnei shar, right, from the left side, and the way it comes down through shtal shem haza, it's usually a negative thing. What is? But over here, it's talking about tzaddikim, so it's not the typical gashmias that's stira and a helm v'hester and lakus, but it's talking about the most elevated, the most purified, the most clarified gashmias. Shur habar, it's shur, but it's habar, it's pure. Bar livav, mashon bar livav, right? That's a pure heart. Ki'inei gam avaydosam b'maise gashmias means that even their service that's in physical acts, just like we mentioned before, and that it has to be not just in physical acts, but physical could mean things like tefillin and even matzah to some extent. That it's not that the guf has much enough from, but things that are physical that the guf has enough from. Simcha, so it has to be refined. It says, these things reach a level that they're not just eating it like it would be understood simply, that they're eating it to fill their needs, Yos's boy, and that makes them happy. But rather, this is also a type of elevation, just like they broke carbonas in days of the Beis Hamikdash. That the Gashmis, the carbon, actually brought physical pleasure to, or whatever that means, a real pleasure to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And similarly, the true avodah of Simcha Basar Yom Tov is not that we should have pleasure, but that we should have pleasure and create for the Eibusher pleasure. That we should have pleasure in you. And the reason we say this is because we can't bring our carbon. So we're saying that we should have pleasure, and this is our carbon, that we should have pleasure in you, and this is in substitute for the carbonas that we can't bring today. And that type of avodah that tzaddikim are doing in this world to their avodah in Gashmias, but with the kavana, ultimate kavana of doing it in a most refined way, in a ruchnistic way. So that's called sharabar mlashon bar livav, a pure heart. Pirish besar zach v'bar, right? Refined, clarified flesh. Which is a joy that actually emanates from the avodah, which is very, very passionate with a lot of energy and fire and work. Slavos. Ella. Became milsa zudisihi the gabi hiluch hanifla shel tzadikim Likutei Livyasan. But in comparison, there's still a great distance, so to speak. There's still a great separation between them and those that are found in the spiritual realms. Because their elevation only was born out of a gashmistic pleasure, out of bashka avodah, ubal and a limited act. So therefore, in relation, if they have to compare the two, the elevation is much more stunted, it's much more limited. So that Rebbe says both are necessary, and he's not really deciding what's superior. He's just saying is that with regards to elevation, how much higher they're reaching, the first type of the tzadikim of Nunayama are reaching much higher and much faster. Mashenki and the tzadikim of Sharabar are much more limited and lower. So therefore,
why should the fight take place then?
Oh, so that's what he explains about.
Huh?
That's what he explains about. It says L'chein ad Livyasan Sharabar. So this is what we just explained what we mentioned before. The Livyasan has to shech the Sharabar. So why is there a fight? Yeah. So he explains. Pirish Yahweh say.
Start off by saying that the bar pierces the Livyasan. The Livyasan is going to retaliate with the fins.
So we'll explain over here. Finish up. Pirish Yahweh said Tishloi. So we're explaining is that the avodah of the Livyasan is superior in a sense because it's higher. Yeah. And therefore it slaughters the Sharabar. But the purpose of it is to elevate it to its level. Now it has both metals. It takes the Sharabar and it elevates it. The whole of Shchita in Shachat al Mashach, Shchita is to elevate. Yeah. So now it elevates it to its level. And that's why it uses specifically its fin. It doesn't take a shachtel, doesn't take a messer, but it takes its fin specifically. Because that's how he became elevated. So he uses that same tool, so to speak, to elevate the sharabar. Which is that the Safrinim are elevated over those other tzaddikim. Therefore, it could use it to elevate them as well. This is the answer to your question. But now that they have both milas, now they could even elevate the Livyasan that was lacking the connection to the Gashmis. Was lacking the mila of the Kavanah, where the Eibush wanted that the whole Avodah should be brought down into this world. Because in a certain aspect, in a certain way, in a certain dimension, Avidasam now is Yeser. They have a superior service. Even though it's taka limited, even though it's taka gashmis, because it's necessary according to Torah not to do it beruchnius. That's necessary because of their avodah. It's not necessary according to Torah. Torah doesn't say anywhere you should do mitzvah beruchnius. Torah says mitzvah gashmis, and the only way of doing gashmis, filling what Torah wants, is basar yain. And being that they have accomplished what the Eibush wanted, basically they're filling the kavanah of the Eibush, so they have to also add the completion of what Livyasan has by elevating Livyasan as well. This is going to be the adventure. This is going to be the entertainment that he's going to show Tzaddik Masalavai how both of your avodas are relevant. Close Havadasa Be'alma. He's going to show them that your avodah, that you are doing it this way because this is your neshama. This is where you come from. And there's other neshamas. Actually, the Rebbe connects these two types of tzaddikim to Bishami's hill. That the Shami Taka was a minority, and that's why we don't pass like him, because his avodah wasn't so relevant, but for the average person.
He was like the Livyasan?
In a sense, yeah. Wasn't so connected to practice, to Gashmis. But plus lava, the tzaddikim are going to be able to understand the value of both avodas and to understand the others, right? And they'll become elevated. Baha high adif, ubaha adif. That they'll be able to appreciate that each one has its value. In a certain sense, one is greater. In a certain sense, other is greater. Skip over here the Haggah. Again, we're about 6 lines from the top, at the end of the line. V'hine halivyasan yishashar bar b'sarpinov. Right? So it starts off, Livyasan, the Livyasan Zeh Yatzarta, right? So he mentions that the Livyasan shechs the sharabar with his fins. And we asked the question that l'chure it's not kosher shchita. It says afshikayim shchita peguma gemurehi. So notwithstanding the fact that it's 100% possible, it's a total pagam to shecht with something that's not smooth. And the reason why it's a total pagam, it's not kosher, is machzah hefsek because it's disjointed. It's not a smooth line, but mashach means you have to carry it through all the way till it's death, shecht it all the way through. You can't stop and start in that way. That there's pieces that is serrated, yeah. But that's specifically the way you're elevating it. Explains why. The purpose is not just to make it one elevation; it's to elevate it to all the various levels that the tzaddikim of the first type, the marine type, were elevating. and that's through the avoid of the Saprinim. The Saprinim are the ones that are giving it all the various elevations that are necessary. So it goes through those stages, and it's necessary to be that way. Right? And therefore, even though it's much faster, there's less friction. The way of tzadikim of Nunayama goes without the same limitations. But nevertheless, there still has to be increments. There still has to be separation. It can't be all at once. Like it's known, even in spiritual realms, right? There's even chambers above that are each one distinct, and you have to be able to enter each one. It doesn't just happen, oh, in Ruchnius and everything's good. Everything has to be on its own way. It's through the various increments. And therefore, the aliyah of the Sharabar has to be dafka in a disjointed way, dafka to Saprinin, and dafka in a way that's not smooth. The actually called is b'machas or hefsek b'hechol hechol l'chein yatakash baruch b'yimuzu. Therefore, part of Terech Chadash means that it was always intended that when it's necessary, there should be this aliyah dafka in the way that's this type of shkita. V'ini Sharabar yalos Livyasan is going to be kind of, and the Sharabar will also elevate Livyasan sof kol sof.
And then after that,
by shteching it in its kanayim, and then both of them you'll be able to see it. It's basically to avoid the real purpose is not that the Livyasan and the Sharabar will be killed. It's that the tzaddikim will be able to see that. They'll have the knigya. Knigya means that this is always the Eibishter's game. The Eibishter always wanted it this way. Mashenkin the tzaddikim, being that their neshamas are coming from a certain place, they don't necessarily appreciate other types of avodas. But them pshitas, the tzaddik that's working gashmis has to be gashmis. The tzaddik that's working in ruchnis, even pshitas has to be ruchnis. And the lot of the kinigya is that we'll be able to appreciate, and we'll see that not just we are both necessary, but we both need each other. And that's what we both can elevate in full Livyasan. Come okay. You should see it very, very soon. Who's watching this? This is live you're watching?
People watch it live, people watch it later. So for listeners,